Good evening and welcome to the March 30th special meeting of council. The city of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish nations and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. I need a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda. Councillor Patterson and Councillor O'Brien. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. We have one presentation tonight. She's going to do a bang up job. I just know it. Ms. Holmes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So as you can see in your agenda tonight, we're going to talk about the water fund and the sewer fund. And as you know, those are funded largely by user fees as well as connection charges. And in some cases, the capital is funded by DCCs as well. We're also going to start to talk about capital, look at specifically water and sewer projects for 2022, similar to what we did with the general fund, and then look at our kind of whole picture of infrastructure renewal, including the equipment replacement reserve, and have some discussion around that. So I've had a request to go fast, so I'll just keep zooming unless there's any questions. Just to touch base on time frame again and remind you that our statutory deadlines are May 15th to get our financial plan bylaws and tax rate bylaws approved. So this is kind of the last of the new information for you. And from here, we'll be looking to council to make decisions on spending packages and tax rate increases and things like that. So we've got tentatively 2 meetings planned in April. We may or may not need those. And so we'll see what happens tonight and we can go to those meetings as needed. So water and sewer, as you know, are one of the few very critical services to our residents and taxpayers. This is a picture of the wastewater treatment plant in Merritt. And as you know, they experienced significant flooding. And although a lot of the community was not flooded themselves, because Merritt essentially lost their water and sewer systems, the whole community was evacuated. So we know that there's not many days can go by if we're not able to provide water and sewer. So these functions are really critical and we place a lot of value on providing excellent service to our residents in this regard. One thing I will note is, as I noted, the water and sewer funds are funded by their user fees, but because we have a whole framework of our staff and our administrative folks, we do allocate some of those costs to the water and sewer funds so that they're bearing their proportion of those. So some of what we'll go through today are allocations of costs that we've already discussed in the general fund, but the sewer and water fund are receiving a proportionate share of those costs, and we reevaluate those costs every year, but it includes an administrative, finance and engineering and public works, kind of administrative and training, and all of those costs are proportionally allocated out to water and sewer. Just an overview of our water and sewer utility infrastructure and some of the activities. Just like Parksville's residents are growing, we're seeing increases in activities and in infrastructure for our water and sewer utility mains and the other equipment as well. So that's just a graphic showing, you can see our lengths of water and sewer mains are both increasing, blue being the water and the orange being the sewer mains. GIS tracks those for us and we report out on that annually as part of our provincial reporting. And you can also see hydrants and water meters also increasing over time. Whoops, wrong way. Okay, getting into the details of the sewer fund a little bit. Just in terms of overview of the sewer utility, we've got some administrative functions, the collection system, the lift stations, treatment and disposal. And one of the most significant costs for our residents related to our sewer utilities is the RDN wastewater treatment requisition. And that is paid both by property taxes and by our sewer user fees. It's split right now. And then obviously our infrastructure that is part of our whole kind of linear asset infrastructure. So that's just a picture of some of our sewer infrastructure. In terms of activity in our sewer utilities, this just out of finance in terms of the number of utility bills that we issue. And you can see that there's been a significant increase in those over time. There was a big jump in 2021 related to the RDN change in solid waste, because that also goes on the utility bills. But just generally, we're seeing over time that those numbers have really increased. And we just are this week issuing our semi-annual invoices, and those numbers have gone up again. So that's just reflective of some of those population numbers and growth numbers that we've been discussing the last few meetings. Okay, just to revisit carry forwards again, similar to the general fund, we've got some projects that started in 2021 but have continued over the year and in some cases are near completion. But just to highlight those for the sewer utilities specifically, those 4 infrastructure projects that we've discussed already, being Bagshaw, Hurston Memorial, and Moss Avenue, all have amounts that are carrying forward and will supplement current funding for those. And you'll see that as we visit minor capital and capital expenditures. As well as, if you recall, we have a spending package related to water and sewer that is for the SCADA hardware. The SCADA software goes hand in hand with that, and that's a carryover from last year. It was on last year's project list, but is going to be purchased in concert with the hardware spending package if that's approved. In terms of minor capital and other special projects in sewer, during the amended budget process last year, if you recall, the sewer video inspection program was deferred a year to start this year. So that was approved by council to not start in 2021, but instead start in 2022. That's a 10-year program where there'll be a certain length of sewer mains and that will be inspected by video, and that will inform our asset management plans. As well as we have the sewer master plan being led by engineering this year, similar to we also had, if you recall, the storm master plan as well as a water master plan this year. The works adjacent to development and construction, we've talked about that before as well, in terms of that's just a contingency amount that's available if there is something comes up during developers' construction within the city. That we can take advantage of that mobilization and replace infrastructure if needed. All of those projects are being funded by sewer user fees. Okay, getting into the revenue and expenditures. In your agenda package, you've got details of this. I'm going to go through the highlights of kind of the high level explanations related to some of the changes in those, but the full package is in your agenda. Sewer user billings and sewer parcel tax are both amounts that we collect from our residents. Parcel taxes are paid by those that own land in Parksville but are not yet connected to sewer or water. So there's a base infrastructure charge that is paid by them. What we noticed in this last year, both for sewer and water, is there's a very significant increase in the sewer and water parcels. And I think that's just reflective of the development that's been happening. The houses aren't built yet. They're not connected to water or sewer yet and being charged a user fee, but they are charged a base parcel tax fee. So when we look at the revenues here, you can see that the financial plan reflects a 3% increase as a starting point for sewer user fees. You can see on the parcel tax that our overall increase is almost 6%, and that's reflective of there just being that many more parcels paying that sewer parcel tax. So it's both the increase of the number of parcels as well as the overall rate increase. Similar with the sewer user billings, we've got more users, but as well as that 3% increase. And essentially what the model has assumed is a 3% increase in rates and about a 1.4% growth increase. And so, you know, that's a best guess, but is quite consistent with some of the population numbers that we've been visiting this year. Looking at what a 3% increase would look like for an average user, we have, if you recall, the sewer water or the sewer user fees are based on water consumption. And so there's a minimum sewer charge based on 100 cubic meters of water per half year. So if we look at what an average resident would have for a whole year of sewer, it would be $204. So a 3% increase would be about $6 to the average house. And so for a total of $210 for a year, again, that's billed twice a year. And typically our water and sewer rates run from an April 1st to a March 31st. So the years pick up partial rates on that. Any questions on that revenue side? As I mentioned, one of the most significant costs for our residents, not that we necessarily pay it directly by the city, but it is done through the RDN and through a requisition on the property tax notice of our residents. We partially pay it through our sewer user fees, and we were starting to move that requisition onto our sewer user fees. We need to work with the RDN to sort out the bylaw related to that. So it's just been put on pause for the time being. But Right now, the 2022 requisition is at $2.9 million, which is about an increase of $300,000 from last year, which is quite significant. I know that there's some significant capital projects happening there, both at the Bay Lift Station, as well as I think that there's coming infrastructure changes out at the plant. And so you'll see in the income statement is that we collect about 500,000 of that through our user fees, and then about 2.4 million shows up as requisition on our residents' property tax notices. This cost is allocated to Parksville and the other participants in this service based on flows completely. It's not based on assessment at all. So it is a usage-based cost allocation. But you can see that over time, over the last 10 years, that's just a real upward trend. And I think that's going to continue. There's more and more environmental impacts and costs related to this, as well as just the cost of construction. As we're seeing here in Parksville, I think it applies at the RDN as well. The RDN provided this graphic just to show Parksville is nearly half of the flows and the usage at that water treatment plant. It is, I think, a little more than 25 years old now, so it is in need of an update, but I'm sure you're all familiar with who the users are here, but I didn't realize that Parksville was just about half of the flows that go through there. So whatever that requisition increase is, Parksville's bearing about half of that. In terms of our direct expenditures for the sewer fund, they're grouped largely into administration, the collection system, and lift station maintenance. You'll see in both water and sewer that the administration has increased related to wages. And we have a new manager of utilities that was someone who we transferred out of engineering and out to the utilities. So it wasn't additional new staff, but just a reallocation of her time. And so her time is allocated between water, sewer, ERWS, and AWS. So you'll see in administration in both sewer and water an increase related to that allocation. The collection system covers activities such as manhole maintenance, main repair, flushing, blockage removal, and customer service. Again, an increase that's probably consistent with some of the costs that we've been discussing and seeing across the board in our operational costs. And then the last of those, the lift station maintenance actually went down this year in terms of budget as compared to last year. The Craig Bay and Martindale Road lift stations, those budgets were just adjusted to reflect recent actual expenses, and that was a downward trend based on our experience directly. Before I move on to water, were there any questions related to our sewer fund? Okay. All right, water then. This is a picture of where the dam is located, which looks spectacular up there. We were all thinking we ought to take a helicopter trip up there. Again, the water utility has administration, service of supply, purification and treatment, transmission and distribution, and then of course our two joint ventures, ERWS and AWS, as well as our residents also have the RDN drinking water and watershed protection requisition as part of the RDN requisition. And of course, we have regulations that we're required to follow as well for all of our water utility as well. This is just a picture of a couple components of our water treatment plant. Some of you may have been on a tour of that recently, and as you know, it was completed in 2019. And we'll have some statistics around that, just showing kind of what the water is being used through the water treatment plant as compared to our wells. And it's some interesting trends on that. For water, we have some carry forward amounts similar to the other funds that we've talked about. Here we've got the Seaway well decommissioning, booster pump replacements, cleaning of reservoir number 4, and the railway wells groundwater study, as well as our 4 infrastructure projects and the SCADA software upgrade. And so all of those amounts have been carried forward and won't have a cost impact on the current year. 2022 minor capital and special projects, as well as just out the 5 years for water. Again, those projects that I just mentioned with respect to the carry forward funding, as well as the works adjacent to development contingency. And here's where we pick up minor capital items that ERWS is doing as well. Just Parksville's share of it shows up in the water fund for Parksville. Those are funded both by water user fees as well as our carry forward reserve, as I referenced earlier. Looking at our total water consumption, there's some really neat data on this graph. On the right-hand side, those pie charts show 2021 total production. So looking at nearly 2.6 cubic meters. When we look at the production source, you can see that about 26% is well and 74% is coming from the water treatment plant. And then on the consumption side, which is only from the water treatment plant water, not the well water, we see that the RDN uses approximately 28% of that water and 72% to Parksville. And those proportions are then used when we're allocating costs in the financial statements for the year of those joint venture participants. In the graph, you can see that our well production is trending down and our ERWS production, the brighter yellow line, is trending up, which would be expected. The more that we have coming out of the water treatment plant and ERWS production, the less we need to be drawing on our wells. So that's allowing the well's health to really recover in a very positive way. The red dotted line is our consumption per capita, and you can see that it is an upward trend. However, the total production, the blue columns, is increasing even more so, and that's really reflecting just having more residents in Parksville that are actually using that water, and is on a steeper kind of trend line than our actual per capita usage. Any questions on that? We do have our Director of Operations here if you've got any specific questions related to our water activities. Okay. Okay, looking at water revenue, the last 2 years we haven't had an increase in water rates. Instead, council has chosen to increase sewer rates only at a higher rate than otherwise. This year, we do have some pretty significant cost increases coming through the water fund. And so right now, within the financial plan that's in the agenda package, that reflects a 2% increase in rates. And so kind of at an average usage rate per year would be about $241. A 2% increase would be about $5 for a total of $246. Again, the same billing timeframe as the sewer infrastructure. And similar to sewer, we also have user billings as well as the water parcel tax. And you'll see that water parcel tax number is up 15.1%. Well, that's really reflective of so many additional water parcels that we're billing that base infrastructure fee to. Other revenues, oh, sorry.
Sorry, and if I may, through your worship, through to Jetta, just a question anyways, on regarding the billings and so forth. And the proposed 2% increase would cover the increased costs that we're projecting anyways for the next year coming up. But to be clear that this is not reflective onto the property tax increase, this is strictly through the water user billings and so forth. So the 2% increase is not going to affect property tax. It's a strictly utility, so it's totally separate from any property tax increase that may or may not happen.
If I may, yes, you're absolutely right. This is completely separate, and those utility funds have to be kind of self-funding. They're not impacted by the property taxes.
Right. So yeah. So to wrap it up here, the 2% increase basically is showing $241, and then with the $5 increase, is that just based on an average? Okay, so basically the average home in Parksville can expect a $5 increase, and that is per billing period.
If I may, that would be for the whole year.
That's annually.
Yeah.
Okay, so it gives us 2 billing periods on the utility. So 250. Okay, thank you.
If I could just add, the basic rate kind of per half year is about 60 cubic meters. So when I chatted with our utility billing clerk today, she said the majority of Parksville bills are going out within that realm. Now, obviously, if you're a larger family, it's probably going to be a little higher. And if you're a single person, it's probably a little lower, but just trying to find kind of a rough approximation for most residents in Parksville.
As a follow-up, if I may, at one time we had a special rate for the larger families type of thing. Is that still in play, or was that just a temporary COVID agreement, or is there a special rate for large families?
If I may, yes, that's still very actively pursued. And yep, we typically kind of get a lot of those requests early in the year as people are getting themselves set up for the year. So I know that that's been happening recently.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, other revenues that show up in our water fund are actually from internal sources and some of that cost sharing that I was referencing earlier. We have a transfer from the fire department and that relates to water fund staff doing fire hydrant maintenance. And so a fee comes from the fire department to the water fund. Again, just trying to make sure that the costs and revenues in these funds are appropriate because they are based on the usage fees. We have a transfer from the sewer fund to the water fund because all of the meter reading costs are tracked in the water fund. So we share that because we need to track that for the sewer fund billing as well. And then there's two kind of categories of DCCs that are applied in the water fund. The first is we use DCCs to repay Parksville's share of the ERWS water treatment construction costs. So that's done each year when we make those debt payments. And I think that that will be in place until 2042, something like that. And then there's DCCs that can be used for our share of water projects. In this case, they're recently used for ERWS construction projects. Again, just Parksville's share. This last year, it was related mostly to the geobag construction that's part of the ERWS project. And so that's that second DCCs for capital revenue line. And so there'll be more of that coming up in 2022 and 2023 as well. In terms of expenditures, again, we've got that increase in administration costs related to moving that new position out as manager of utilities and her costs being allocated to the water and sewer utilities. The Springwood and River pump stations, the service of supplies actually decreased. Again, just I think staff has done a great job in evaluating actual costs and adjusting budgets where appropriate downward if needed. You know, if we don't need the costs, then it's good to adjust those budgets and absorb some of the increases the other way. In terms of water service repairs, we've got an increase there, again, just reflecting recent actual costs on that. So we've got some up and some down within our expenditures in the water fund. Finally, the purification and treatment costs that are in your agenda package related to the water fund is all the costs related to the two joint ventures, the AWS and the ERWS, as well as there's a contribution for Parksville's share of a reserve that's being built for capital replacement in the ERWS. Both of those boards approve their own budgets. So the AWS budget was approved last November and the ERWS was approved in December. And just a reminder, I've included there the proportionate shares of Parksville in each of those joint ventures. Both of them have splits based on administration and maintenance costs. And then there's also operating costs are allocated based on actual water usage. And so that's both for AWS and ERWS. And of course, Parksville operates those on behalf of the joint ventures. Okay, any questions on water before I move on?
Thank you, Your Worship, through to Jed again. Speaking specifically to the ERWS Water Fund, on the revenue side, the funding sources, and maybe I missed it on the slides as they went by, Jetta, but on joint venture agreement for the ERWS, where we have a joint venture agreement with RDN Area E, did I miss the amount? Like I recognize the fact that it's 26% is what the formula is, 20% of total expenditures, I would assume, is what they're for. Was there a number figure up there where, or do we just know that they're paying 26%, or did I miss the slide? Like I was looking for it under revenue because I understand what Parksville is contributing, but I was just wondering what the contribution is RDN Area E.
If I may. So all we pick up in our water fund is just our share. So all of the revenue side and the other participant side isn't picked up in here at all. We only pick up from the AWS and ERWS statements, just our share of the costs come in to our water fund.
I see. So the ERWS through Area E or RDN as is reflected here. So that's just a revenue that comes in, but it's not shown in here. It's just that we build them. Is that how it works? We build the RDN, or how do we recover the RDN portion?
Yeah, if I may. That accounting is done separately for those. So we have separate financial statements for the AWS and ERWS. So RDN pays essentially the joint venture. We do the accounting there and provide whatever to or from needs to be done. So within our water fund and what we need to recover from our residents is Parksville's share of those costs that are accumulated in the joint venture financial statements. And that's essentially accounted for separately. So there isn't revenue shown here necessarily. We just recover the costs through the joint venture.
Okay, that's what I was hoping to see, the revenue.
Yeah.
That's what I like to see.
Yeah.
So.
So you need to look at your ERWS and AWS financial statements separately,
Right.
and that's where you'll see those requisitions come in from each of the participants.
Right, and am I correct in saying that there's perhaps a renegotiation of the agreement for the ERWS? Maybe that would be going through our CAO. Sorry, Keith.
Sorry, from Your Worship. Yes, we are planning on bringing that back, I believe, in May. We've been reviewing it at the staff level and meeting with the RDN staff. I think I've seen 1 or 2 drafts, but we're hoping to get it back to the board at the next meeting. And I just had a note from our Director of Communications that she noticed a typo on a year, saying 2020, it should be 2021 approved. I don't know what that's referring to, but.
Oh, yes. Yep. It was, they both say November 17th, 2022 and December 13th. I apologize for that. It
Okay,
should be
yeah, right.
21.
We're not there yet.
We can live with that one. Go ahead.
I'll set it up for this year to be approved on those dates so that we
Mhm.
can just reuse the slide next year.
So that amount then will be, those numbers will bring back to the board of the ARWS or to
Yes.
council?
If I may, Your Worship.
Yes,
through you.
please, go
So,
ahead.
To the board first.
Yes. Okay.
And then the councils and the RDN board would be asked to endorse.
Thank you. So
after
that's
that.
anticipated in May.
Yes, our next meeting, I believe, is we're trying to get it set up for May.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we're gonna get into capital, both for water and sewer, as well as the equipment replacement reserve. And then also discuss overall infrastructure renewal within the city. First up is our equipment replacement reserve. And this is a real success story in terms of how the city has managed the replacement of equipment and vehicles in terms of self-funding it and very effectively charging it out to the departments that use that equipment. I should count how many pieces of equipment we do in there, but it's essentially all of our equipment that has wheels. So including vehicles and mowers and tractors and things like that. During 2021, there were 6 procurement tenders that were put out with respect to replacements within our equipment replacement reserve. And this is, again, similar to our water and sewer fund, a self-funding accounting related to these activities. The fleet supervisor and myself manage this quite actively and meet about 4 times a year just to check in on where we're at in terms of our charge out rates, in terms of our replacements. What we've noticed over the last 2 years with COVID is that they're really extended delivery times. And so council has probably seen this where we're having to come back to you and ask for it to be carried forward to the next year because it's taking in some cases 18 months to get, even a basic truck delivered. So we may need to change how we procure some of the equipment. If we want it to be here for next year, we might actually have to start the procurement process now. A couple of positive things have happened in this regard, though. We are beginning to work with a group procurement procedure that is being managed a little bit through Civic Info, or at least endorsed by them. And what we're finding and have already found is that they can expedite delivery in some cases just through the relationships that they have with that. So we've had some recent procurements starting to use it's called Canoe. And we're hoping that not only might we get better pricing, but we might get better delivery timeframes within that. So for the next 5 years related to that, what this shows that top internal rental earnings is essentially all of the charge out rates to the various departments that use the equipment. And this fund earns interest at a rate that is determined based on what we're earning on our investments. As well, we have trade-ins on many of our vehicles and equipment, so that proceeds on sale of capital assets essentially reflects what we estimate we might get in a trade-in. Of course, we don't know, so we try and make a best guess and be very conservative about that. The operations number there, starting with 410,000 in 2022, is where all of our vehicle and equipment expenditures go through. So that's all of our maintenance, insurance, and that's where the fuel line is. So the actual costs in 2021 were about $360,000. So we've built in quite a significant increase there reflective of fuel costs right now. I've read a number of articles recently of municipalities going back to their budgets and increasing to try and guess what that is. Of course, none of us know what it might be. What I can tell you is that the equipment replacement reserve is very well funded and it's in a very good place. So if costs do continue for some time, I believe we can absorb some of that and we would bring that back to council for an amended budget if need be, but it has done very well. Fortunately or unfortunately, we had quite a boon through COVID because we had very significant increases in vehicle usage as we spread people out across our vehicles. And so, sorry, that was reflected in those costs and kind of flowed back to the equipment replacement reserve. And then the capital line along the bottom is our intended purchases within the year. You'll see this year is quite high, largely because of delays in delivery. So the 2 dump trucks that we had ordered last year and that council gave approval for purchase have both carried into this year. And we've seen that again over the last couple of years where things are taking a significant amount of time to be delivered. And then the transfer to or from is just really the balancing entry on that.
Thank you, through your worship, through to Director of Finance. And this might actually fall also into Director of Operations, Belinda Woods. I got a question in regards to equipment that we're sending off to be resold or trying to recover some funds on. Could you explain just for the public and for myself too, how does that process work? Because we're seeing a record dollar being paid for a lot of used equipment. Are we seeing better dollars from these vehicles that we're getting sold as used vehicles in a sense, or how does that process work?
If I may. Well, we haven't actually had a lot to sell recently, so I can't say that we have seen that necessarily, but our policy does require that any equipment that is kept has to be sold in a kind of public way. So either through an auction house or something like that. It's not sold internally or anything of that nature. So it will be interesting. This year, we do have a number of pickup trucks that are being replaced, both at the fire department and we've got some in our equipment replacement reserve. So it'll be interesting to see if we do see that. I think it was last year we bought a used forklift just because the pricing on them was reasonable. And so our new purchasing policy is going to allow for that as well. Sometimes it makes the procurement kind of evaluation a little more challenging because you're not dealing with same equipment, but I think we can get very good value for our dollars often by buying something that's slightly used. So our policy will allow for that.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up, if I may, Your Worship, and same sort of idea, I guess, in a sense, like, as you see what these pickup trucks are going for, I'm seeing pickup trucks going for $80,000 and $74,000 in used equipment, and not let alone new. So I'm not suggesting we're going to get that kind of money, but there's a record dollar being paid for these units. And so I think we all want to know that if these are going to be coming up, that we're getting our best dollar. And I think I see a lot of that stuff on BC auction. And I know on the federal side, you're seeing it through surplus GC and all that stuff. But I'm just kind of curious. It's just, it's a process that, there's a lot of money going out on this side, and just, are we recovering, a decent amount on the other end? That's all. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate the answers.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, through your worship, to Jetta. So given the rising costs of fuel, and I would take it that the reason we need to replace the equipment is because of the engine and all of the mechanics more than any other aspect to it. Would there be any thought given to converting these vehicles into electric? I know there is a firm just down the road that does that, because if it's all about fuel and motors and all of those things that break down, that might be another way of replacing the vehicles by keeping them.
If I may, a couple of thoughts on that. One is, we'll see it on the next slide, but early in council's term, you did ask us to revisit the replacement cycles on vehicles. So those have certainly extended, and we try and find that balance between what we might get for a trade-in and how the vehicles are operating. And what the fleet supervisor and myself have done is, by meeting quite frequently during the year and really just evaluating what's up for replacement, and not necessarily saying, well, it's 6 years, we're going to replace it. Really looking at how is it running, and he visits and discusses with each of the users or the frequent users of those vehicles to see whether it makes sense to replace them this year. If it's working properly in the maintenance costs, we track all of those for each vehicle. If those aren't kind of escalating, then maybe it might get extended for another year. So that's the first thing we do, is try and just extend it while still balancing what we might get. Now, fortunately, the trade-in market is quite good right now in terms of our ability to get a good return on that. That said, we did attend a webinar on, there's more and more that are providing expertise to municipalities and other government organizations to electrify your fleet. And so we're learning about that more, trying to consider that as alternatives when we are looking to replace vehicles. So that's just starting right now. There, of course, needs to be all the infrastructure for the charging. And so that's the other side of it. And so if we are going to start moving our fleet towards more electric, which is probably the way over time we would do, then there needs to also be the investments in the charging infrastructure. And so it's weighing the costs of those various things. But I think that's certainly the direction. And like I say, there are webinars and more education available to us now to start thinking about electrifying those fleets.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship, and to the Jetta. It's nice to hear that we're purchasing a used piece of equipment. Over the years that I've been here, we've done very little of that. It was always new equipment, and was always like after 5 years, they were gone, whether they worked or not. And it's nice to see that things are changing, because there's a lot of communities that I've investigated that buy nothing but used equipment. And we've been pretty rich in this city buying new equipment on a regular basis. And so it's nice to see that maybe we're considering some used equipment. Good, thanks.
Thank you. All right, moving right along.
Okay, just really quickly, this is the list of equipment that will be replaced this year. You'll notice the 2 dump trucks on there that council gave specific direction to approve those amounts because they were higher than what we expected. That's a picture of what one of the dump trucks will look like. And you'll see that the 2 larger trucks there that all are also used in our snow fight, the Ford F550 and the Ram 5500, both at that $85,000 price point, and they are, our fleet supervisor really looks into and researches these replacement values. In terms of capital projects related to sewer, we've got those 4 infrastructure projects that we talked about, finishing off Bagshaw. And last year, Bagshaw was more about the roads and the water. And this year is mostly, the significant part is the sewer. And so that amount is about $330,000 this year. And finishing off Hurston Memorial. These pictures here are from Moss, and so that project will get started this year, as well as the SCADA software upgrade that we talked about in the carry forwards. Sorry. That's
Sorry, I
fun.
can't see you either, so.
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah,
panning
you're gonna
over
have to
here.
close that.
We're good on the 10. I can move back. It's just for the
Oh,
microphone.
we'll get the door.
Oh, thank you. Through your worship, through to Jetta. The question I had was regarding Moss Avenue. That is approved anyways, or for 2022, that for $269,000. Has any of that been identified as being paid by DCCs, or any grants available? Has been assist in the funding of that?
If I may. No, that's completely was property tax funded. There is carry forward though related to that because there was taxation on it, I think perhaps 3 years ago, that has been carried forward to fund a lot of it, but no, it wasn't a DCC project.
Okay,
Mhm.
so if things get down to a crunch, like is the infrastructure failing on Moss Avenue to McKillop, that is an essential. Where just in the case, and then to be blunt, the news came out recently that all municipalities are going to be hit with a huge retroactive fund from the funding for the RCMP. That they advised last night that it's going to be huge, and it goes back to 2017. So, and it's going to be, the hammer's going to drop in 2022. So the thing is that I'm just wondering, if I'm looking at projects now, if all of a sudden we get hit with a just slightly less than the average is going to be less than $1 million for the retroactive contribution. I'm just looking at projects that are not already have DCC funding that we're going to have to find 269,000 for. So it was just announced last night. So the thing is that it's coming. So I'm just looking at different projects as, if they already have DCC funding in place, but we have to, we're going to have to come up with 269 grand.
If I could for just a second, because my understanding is that we already know what the RCMP costs are for this year coming up for 2022. We've been advised what that number is, and it's included in this budget, if I'm not mistaken. Go ahead.
I can speak to that. So on the RCMP piece, I think what's happening is they're actually just finally issuing the invoice related to the retroactive, but they gave us all the information and estimates earlier this year. And so our total is going to be approximately $550,000 to $575,000. We had already accrued $340,000 over the last number of years. And then the balance we were able to fund just with the surplus related to RCMP last year, because we paid for 17 members and only got actually billed for about 13 and a half. And so we were able to absorb it within our 2021 budget. So we're not going to see the impact of that retroactive amount in the current year. What we will see is that the increased per capita cost has increased to about $204,000 per member, but we won't be seeing that huge impact. We were able to absorb that in our prior year.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. As a follow-up to I was not aware that they had actually released the retroactive all the way back to, it's 5 years worth anyways of fees and so forth, because as the news release that came out last night was the many municipalities in British Columbia are getting word that I think they're hoping for federal cooperation anyways to help and assistance. And at this particular point, the federal government is declining any offer of any assistance. It's providing to be a huge hardship on many municipalities in BC. So I was just trying to guess if this is coming down, that you're already ahead of the game. If we already know it, and I should have known that, because Parksville usually is. So the thing is that I just clarifying that anyways, if we already have to, go looking for money, I just want to know where we should be looking at.
If I could just add one more thing, what has happened over the last 5 years is that when we get our annual statement from the RCMP, they have been recommending an amount to accrue, saying we estimate that the retroactive amount might be X dollars. So we have accrued that every single year and been able to do it because we haven't been at full capacity in our RCMP. So our current year budget has allowed us to do that retroactive accrual. It's been building on our financial statements. And so although the actual amount payable, the first estimate looked like it was going to be double our accrual, it was going to be closer to $700,000. But when I reached out to RCMP earlier in the budget process, because I wanted to understand what our impacts were, they were able to get back to us. We actually got a letter that was an amount up until last year, and then they've given us an estimate up until now. So we're still dealing with estimates, but it's about 200,000 less than the first estimate. What I understand is that not all municipalities did those retroactive accruals. And so if you didn't do that, all of a sudden you're getting hit with $1 million or $2 million, depending on the size of your municipality. And some of those are in really desperate shape. But fortunately, Lucky got us, starting from the first year, we accrued it every year. And so we were in better shape than most. We didn't have 100%, but we were able to absorb it just because of the nature of our capacity in the RCMP here. Yeah.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. And although I knew the answers, I appreciate having them voiced. And I just wanted to say, this is another prime example of our city staff and our Director of Finance, Jetta Holmes, and our previous Director of Finance. Because it's going back not just this year or last year or the year before, it's been ongoing for a few years now. And I'd like to think that when I review some of our other municipalities in BC, when we look, we have always been a little bit cautious and trying to put those unknowns and everything budgeted for. So again, I very much appreciate our CEO and staff for being looking to the future.
Thank you.
Just as one more point on that, just because I think it's a really good point to make for the people of Parksville to understand, is it's not just even with the RCMP. We've been doing this with all of our reserves for equipment. We've been allocating money all the way along. So as soon as we buy a dump truck, we start allocating for the next one when it comes due. And that has put this city in very good stead. That's why we have significant surpluses and reserves in the bank right now for the future. And we should be very proud of the work that staff has done right from the beginning. So we'll go from there. Thank you. Did I see anybody else's hands up on that one?
Okay, so that was the sewer capital projects, again, going hand in hand with what we saw in terms of the infrastructure projects in the general fund. Water, we're seeing the same thing, the same infrastructure projects, finishing off what's left on Bagshaw, which isn't very much. First and Memorial will be finished this year, and then starting on Moss Avenue with respect to water. We've got some other smaller equipment purchases as well as the software on the SCADA system upgrade. And those are being funded both by water user fees and the carry forward reserve. None of those are DCC projects. Again, just a picture of our Memorial project, which I think must have been taken from a drone.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I would like to discuss with you tonight, and it kind of follows on the comments with respect to the equipment replacement reserve, in that it really helps when we're funding our capital infrastructure and other assets in a sustainable way. It helps to manage property taxes and increases and decreases in those rates. It helps to manage our surpluses and funding related to that. So when we talk about infrastructure renewal, I'm talking about our linear capital assets, our roads, our storm drainage, our water mains, and our sanitary sewer mains. Those projects are typically led by the engineering department in terms of planning it and facilitating and overseeing those projects, but they're certainly supported by our operations staff largely, as well as finance and admin. And we have contractors and consultants that we use as well. The planning for those projects is informed by master plans, some of which are in the budget for this year, condition assessments and video scoping. And I know we've talked a lot about that over the last number of meetings, in that we really need to do some work in that area to inform our asset management plans as well as our long-term infrastructure plans, because it feeds into how we can fund those in a sustainable way. They should be added to long-term plans based on risk assessments, right? We should be dealing with the projects that have a criticality to them because of risk or impact to our residents. And then our asset management planning will flow out of all of that and ties in with our reserves policy, ties in with our tax rates and our long-term financial planning. It's also informed by kind of the on-the-ground experience and feedback, both from our operations staff as well as requests for service that we get from residents. What we have historically done, and I don't mean for you to look at this because it's a crazy, horrific spreadsheet, but what it shows is that we have a whole list of projects and they go across all years and they're meant to cover all of those 4 areas that we've talked about. And it's largely been based on a life cycle that's been in the ground for 50 years. It's time to replace it. And it hasn't been as informed by some of those plans that we've been talking about. And I think in order for us to move to the next stage of sustainably funding our infrastructure, we maybe need to take a different approach. And I'd like to walk you through a possibility that council may want to consider in terms of sustainably funding our infrastructure renewal. So I'm talking specifically about that linear asset renewal, not about other projects like that we might do in the community park or trails or things like that, but just our linear infrastructure. And that is to consider what is the sustainable amount of investment in infrastructure renewal that we can really do every year. We need to consider our financial position, which is healthy, but we also know that when we get through all of these plans and do our asset management plans, we likely have an infrastructure deficit, as most municipalities do. And then we need to also look at what are our staffing levels and what level of projects can we take on in any one year. I think that we should be focusing on a sustainable level of funding rather than a list of projects to be done or a squeaky wheel or something like that. We should say, what can we support at a certain level of taxation? And are we willing to go to a higher level of taxation in order to do more projects by hiring more staff and paying more contractors to do that work? Or do we want to accept a level that we can afford? The project should be determined based on annual and long-term risk assessment processes. So we can look at the whole city, and all of these plans will inform where our risks are and where we can afford to put things off for a little while. But obviously things happen, as we've seen in our communities over the last year, Merritt or the Fraser Valley, things happen and climate change is real. So I think when we're looking at a sustainable way of funding infrastructure, it allows us to be more agile in responding to things that happen, because we're in a place where we're financially strong, but we have plans in place that address the risks, and some of those risks will be with consideration to climate change. Then what would happen if we were to accept a certain level of funding, whatever that dollar amount is, then at our five-year financial planning process, we would bring that forward and council would be informed of, okay, here's what's happening in the current year and here are some of the projects. If there were pluses and minuses from that, what is often referred to as a funding envelope, then that would come up with council at the time. So this is a change in how we've funded our infrastructure replacement. I think it would allow for us to have success in funding it, similar to how council approved a certain staffing level a number of years ago. And our CAO has been able to reallocate and redelegate resources within that staff funding envelope that has allowed us to be very agile in responding to the needs of council and the needs of our residents. Our equipment replacement reserve is a really good example of that as well, where we have a sustainable level of funding and can manage it in that regard. What I would suggest to you is we've got our new team really has largely informed why we're bringing this to you. Our new director of operations and our new director of engineering, Belinda and Sean, both have significant experience in infrastructure renewal and replacement. And I think that we together are bringing this to you for your consideration. What we'll show you later, and I'll give Belinda and Sean an opportunity to add their thoughts on this as well, is it's very impactful to how we can manage our long-term financial plans. And we've got some charts that we can show you. I know council has previously expressed concern around kind of how are we balancing those surpluses and those tax rates, and how do we kind of actively manage those amounts. So I'd like to give our Director of Operations and Engineering an opportunity to add their thoughts on and their experience related to funding infrastructure renewal in this way. And then if you've got any questions, we'd be happy to take those.
If I may, Your Worship.
Please.
So like Jenna mentioned, previously infrastructure renewal was based on time. So we would give a 25-year life cycle, a 30-year life cycle for infrastructure without knowing exactly what's in the ground. This doesn't account for use. It doesn't account for materials that maybe are better or worse. It doesn't account for environmental issues that may lengthen or shorten the time frame that an asset has its integrity. So as you've seen through Jenna's report here, you'll see a lot of staff asks for assessments. We're asking for video scoping. We're asking for pavement assessments. We're asking for sewer and water assessments. And with these, we will be able to create a criteria on how we renew our resources. And there's also a variety of different ways that we can extend the life of our resources. So for example, if our pavement is fine, as our water is fine, we might have some sewer pipe issues. We can do a process like cure in place, where we don't have to tear up the road to fix it. We can actually go inside the pipe, reline it, and give it another 10 or 15 years of life. So those are the, we need to have that database so we can be able to look in all the pipes, look at the pavement assessments, and then based on that, like Jenna was mentioning, we do a risk assessment and we pick those ones that are our highest priority. So maybe a street that might be 25 years old might still be in great shape, and something that's 20 years old might not be. And that's how we set our priorities. This can be set by a budget amount, and this is what staff is recommending, that we set a budget amount every year of a dollar amount, and Jenna will show you how that plays out with our future plans of around $4 million is what we're estimating from our experience at this point. But once we get those assessments, we'll be able to have a better understanding of that. We don't want property taxes to be going up and down based on a life cycle that's not merited by data. It's not merited by facts. So we want to do establish a criteria. We want to build our metrics. We want to be able to plan in advance so that we know years out what we're planning to do. This allows us to be more agile, and it allows us to look for those things like grants and DCs and those other funding sources when we know, okay, this has got an expiry date on it versus it's just an age. So what we're requesting is that we shift our methodology from just a time-based life cycle methodology, which is a rather legacy, it's a rather an older system. And now that we have the tools and the methodologies to be able to actually grade our infrastructure and rate our infrastructure based on science and data, we're asking that we shift away from a year cycle to a data-driven cycle based on how the infrastructure is performing.
If I may, Your Worship.
Please.
Yeah, it would just really allow us to plan for the future if there's a number that we can work to, as opposed to that spreadsheet that Ms. Holmes had up that had some large numbers, some small numbers, and it's just going up and down, up and down. That's kind of what I call the tail wagging the dog. We're trying to build a budget based on a bunch of projects instead of you setting the budget level, and then we plan for that and propose projects based within that budget. It's just a much more level, even way of doing things.
If I could just call just for a second, I'm listening to what's being said here. If you can recall, in the last couple of years and in forever before that, you would get these lists. In 1 year, engineering would say, we're going to do $12 million worth of projects. And the next year, we're going to do 8 million. And the year after, we're going to do 15 million. And at the end of the day, the reality is that we don't have the staff or the ability or the capacity to be able to do that 12 million or $15 million. So it just gets carried forward to the next year, to the next year. So we're chasing projects constantly year after year is what I'm hearing. And so you're suggesting that you want to put a finite amount of, you mentioned $4 million in there and say, okay, that is a workable number that we can live with, and we go forward. If we find out it's not, what do? You move up or down or whatever. Is that the idea?
Right.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Fair enough. Thank you.
Okay. I'll just add a little bit more detail on that. What we would propose as a starting point is a $4 million. That seems to be looking at over the last number of years, when we've been fully staffed in engineering, we've been able to manage projects of about that amount. Of course, that's split across the general water and sewer funds because the components related to water mains need to be in water and sewer, and then roads and drainage stay in general. So it would be a $4 million total split across those, with the majority, about 3.2 million, being in the general fund and the rest in water and sewer. Of course, all of this work we're doing this year may inform that it needs to be higher or lower, and just depending what we discover when we do all of this review of our assets. And of course, all of that information will come back to council as we develop plans and metrics around that to assist you in your decision-making. Happy to take any questions on this. I have some charts that can kind of show the impact on our financial plan of moving towards a kind of funding envelope like that, rather than the list of projects that's in your agenda packages. And it's something that I would recommend that we move to. And it is very consistent with, one, wanting to have a sustainable level of infrastructure replacement. Two, it's consistent with all of the planning that we're wanting to do. And three, just being agile and responding to whether it's climate change or responding to funding opportunities or things like that, because I think we'll just have much better data, as Belinda referred to, in order to respond to those changing factors. So happy to take any questions before we go any further.
Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Worship. Through to Jetta, just trying to get a handle on this. It sounds good on the surface. So this program would have to take place before, or does the asset and infrastructure management the study be completed first? Or can we start working on this? Like, I understand the asset management is in play, and I'm not sure what the, when we're going to be completed on it. If maybe you could answer that question first. Do we have a completion date for that?
Sure, if I may. So I think all of those plans, one, are mostly subject to council's approval of this current financial plan. So we would get started on those. And realistically, they're likely going to take us a couple of years to get all of that information and start to develop it into plans. That said, that funding envelope could be implemented immediately, right? We have projects on the dock. Staff had already pulled back this year, as we indicated earlier, in projects this year to allow for the capacity to take on all of those planning and assessment activities. However, going forward, if we know that council has set a certain limit, then that we can already start to work based on the data that we do have in assessing risks of various projects. And again, based on that other data, including on the ground data of where we know that there are problems. And so that's something that could be implemented right away, starting this year.
So that fund, that $4 million funding envelope that you're recommending, anyways, is that going to be over and above, like when we had the slide showing the projected Moss Street is going to be 2022, and then Hearst Street is going to be 2023 and 24 and 25. That projection to everything, is that projection of infrastructure projects going to still take place, like as you say, it's a like as a legacy type of thing agreement, like it's reaching its end of its life? Is this over and above that, or is that going to take place of that?
If I may, it would take the place of. So this year's funding, this year's projects are within that envelope amount already.
Yes.
And so what would happen if council were to give us the approval to move ahead with this is we would bring you back a financial plan that would change up the lists. And the lists are just lists, right? They're completely changeable, and we would change towards using that funding envelope, and the financial plan would just show a maximum amount of that for the linear infrastructure. Other projects like performance venue or capital in the community park, that would all be separate. So that isn't a max on total capital, but it does, with the infrastructure replacement, put that within a sustainable way of managing those assets.
And with that $4 million, you feel that we have sufficient staff to handle that, and like with the ability to complete? I'm assuming that's an annual fee figure, so that in 1 year type of thing, without having to worry about more carry forwards, because staffing has been very tight. So.
If I may, and I'll allow Belinda and Sean to also add their thoughts on this. That's historically kind of what we've been able to do fully staffed. As you know, we are having some challenges filling staff, especially in engineering. So, you know, we're hoping that's going to turn around this year, but that would be, in theory, that's based on evaluating the last number of years is how we came up with that number. Is that's what we think we can manage with full capacity. So again, that staffing piece is a little bit out of our control right now. We're all efforts trying to get those spots filled, but yeah, in theory, that's what historically we've been able to do, and not more than that. And you'll note, if you could see the small numbers on that spreadsheet, some of those are up to $10 and $12 million. We know that that's beyond our capacity with our current staffing.
Thank you.
Councillor Greer. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Sean.
Sorry, if I may, Your Worship. That being said, there still almost always would be monies carried forward, because by the time the budget is adopted in May, that doesn't really give enough months to design, tender, and build a street. So typical of Memorial and Hearst started last year, but it's being finished this year. That's normal, and we'll see that all the time. So each year there will be funds carried forward, a new 4 million, say, or whatever number, and it just continually rolling forward. But I just want to be clear, like there'll always be a carry forward.
if I could add one more comment to that is that in terms of accountability, council would still be involved in the procurement process in terms of receiving the tender evaluation and approving the awards so that it's not as though the costs are completely, it's not just an envelope in that way. Our processes of bringing those back to you for your approval would still happen as is indicated in our purchasing policy. So that piece wouldn't change. It just would put an upper limit on what we're allowing for in our financial plan and would tie very closely to the reserves policy I hope to bring you later in the year, in that we would contribute to capital reserves that would start to fund that envelope, and it becomes very similar to the equipment replacement reserve in that it's a self-funded sort of capital asset system.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through to Jetta. I like the sustainable financing that you've been talking about and which way we're going. Do we have any indication of what our taxes will be this year, or is this for the next meeting?
If I may, couple slides away, we're going to talk about that. Yeah, we do have some kind of early numbers on the tax rate increase and hoping to get some direction from council on that tonight, and then hopefully bring you something
Right.
more firm at the next meeting.
So our water and sewer is going up 5%. You're talking about, which is a separate bill, of course. So it has nothing much to do with taxes, other than the people still have to pay it. Anyways, I got a few comments later on, so I'll wait. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Please.
Thank you for letting us explain that. I think it's a really positive way to move forward in our financial planning. Just a reminder on spending packages. This is the same list you had last time. And I believe staff has really kind of come to you with things that we feel are critical and very important in the year. So as we move into the next slides with respect to looking at possible tax rates, you've got an extra sheet there for your consideration as we look at rates and what the impact of these might be on the property tax rate. Again, I feel that staff has brought things forward this year that are either critical for a safety or efficiency perspective. And we've got things in just about every department, but including the water and sewer that we looked at tonight. So I'd like to show you kind of three different scenarios with respect to possible property tax rate increases. In the amended budget from 2021, there was a 3.5% tax increase throughout, and the current numbers that we've been looking at have reflected that 3.5% still in place. I also looked at, okay, what do we need to go to kind of be in a positive place out of a deficit in our 5-year plan, which is largely how we've kind of managed our tax increases over the last number of years, is making sure that we're not in a deficit in 5 years. And it kind of flows through the accumulated surplus. So we needed to, without consideration of the spending packages, be close to a 5% tax increase to get to that place this year. The next kind of graphic I'd like to show you is what if we did 3.5%, which if you recall is really a 3% tax increase with a 0.5% to go towards that capital reserve that you approved last year. And if we followed this infrastructure funding formula of putting a maximum number on the capital, and in the general fund, which is what is funded by property taxes, it would be 3.2 million of that 4 million. And the other thing that I'll show is what if we funded all of the spending package items as well? So we'll look at what that looks like in terms of impact on the property taxes. And the last would be to keep it at that 5% property tax increase and also reduce the capital and include the spending packages. And what do those numbers look like if we do that? So the first chart shows us status quo, the same capital, long list, and no spending packages funded. And you can see that at the end of our 5 years, we go straight into a deficit. So we're not quite balanced in the current year with a 3.5. We're just about balanced with a 5%. And then beyond the 5-year point, we're into a deficit position in our accumulated surplus. And by the way, these are reflecting early numbers from our audit that's going on with respect to our surplus. So I think we're dealing with pretty close numbers, although they're subject to change. These are more illustrative, but I'm hoping that they're pretty accurate. So that's where we're at if we weren't to make any changes and not fund any of the spending packages. The next chart shows if we had the 3.5% property tax increase, which is 3 plus 0.5 into our capital reserve. The blue line shows that status quo where we're into a deficit in the 5th year. But you can see that the other two, so this is with putting that cap on the capital funding, we're at a positive position across all 10 years and beyond. And so you can see that the top kind of brownish colored one is just with the maximum cap, but not funding the spending packages. And the lower line is funding all of the spending package items. And you can see that we stay in a positive surplus position across all 10 years. The next one, just for illustration, is the 5%. Again, you see us go into a deficit in the 5th year of the financial plan and at a higher level of surplus with funding all of the spending packages and or just eliminating that excess capital and funding within the funding envelope for the infrastructure renewal. That leaves all of the other capital asset additions that have been posed in place. That wouldn't be limited. It would just be the infrastructure. So you can see that it's very, very impactful to manage more actively that infrastructure renewal number, which, as we know, we haven't been doing each year anyway, but it allows us to plan in a better way financially for the surplus and the investment of those infrastructure renewal dollars, and know that we're staying in a sustainable way in a surplus position and not moving into deficit. So you've got copies of these in your package. Staff would certainly welcome your direction tonight if you feel you're in a position to do that, both with respect to tax rate increase and the spending packages. What we would see at the next meeting is bringing you back an updated plan for all of the general water and sewer funds that would reflect your direction, and hopefully get to a place where we're drafting a bylaw as well as a tax rates bylaw for you. So welcome any questions on these charts. We can go back and forth if you've got any other questions related to those.
Councillor Greer.
Yeah, thank you, John. Over the years that I've been here, we've always projected a deficit after 5-10 years. And it looks awfully bad if we don't stay the status quo. However, here we are 14 years later, and that's never ever happened. We've been able to stay out of the red. We've always done very well and with our finances due to good organizational staff-wise, et cetera, et cetera. But I was concerned when I got the email from our CAO today about the number of work hours that now have increased. And I've written up just a little thing here. I'm not so sure what the RDN, what their tax rate's going to be. Do you have any idea? They mentioned 10% in the paper. I think the mayor mentioned 8.
If I may, I think it's about 10 or 11.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is really high. And then we don't know what the school taxation is going to be as well.
Right.
And that hasn't been decided. But anyways, after seeing the number of working hours the CEO had laid out today, I think there's a correlation between the city receiving more tax dollars this year, raising taxes while at the same time forcing city staff to work more hours. We should have a red line in the sand where we keep city hours, staff hours at a reasonable level, while at the same time having more of a priority list where we eliminate some projects and spending. To be successful, it is not always how much you spend, but how much that you save. It seems government want to spend every cent when sorry about this, I should have written this larger because my eyes aren't very good. It means governments want to spend every cent and then come to some happy ending. It is not a time to spend more money and raise taxes. The RDN has already had a problem in spending too much money, and this year is no exception. I don't know what the school taxes will be, but you can bet they will go higher as well. Someone has to be the adult in the room and come to grips with spending tax dollars wisely. We do not have to give the residents everything. This is only a small community, and I think we do extremely well in giving them most things. I believe they understand at this time with costs soaring, some restraints are necessary. I can tell you next year will be much different with a new pool and cost of living going even higher. We don't want to be part of the problem when more and more people become homeless. Not everyone is going to survive these crazy times. If there was ever a time to take a stock of our priority list, it is now. And I think over the years that I've been here, we've never really sat down and have seen a priority list where city, I mean, it's hard for council to see the priority list when it comes to spending, but we've never really had staff come and say, I think we can eliminate the last 4 items on this. And I think it's time that we have to really look at what we're spending in taxes and how the people are going to see this going forward. So just to mention a few things. Good, thanks.
Thank you. I just have a question through your worship to Jetta. With your slide that's up on the screen right now, I want to be clear. So it's a 5% property tax increase that it's hard to see those colors here, but anyways, for 5% for the maximum cap, the program that you just talked about, the 4 million.
Right.
Yeah, okay. And then the next one is 5 million, or sorry, 5% with the spending packages all approved.
Right.
Is there a amount like for 5%, 4 million and spending packages?
Yeah, that's the middle line.
Okay.
Is the kind of goldy orange colored one is
Okay, okay.
if all the spending packages were approved and we maxed the capital.
And it still equals a
positive.
5% increase.
Yeah, that would be 5. But you can see here on the 3.5 that it's also still positive.
Yes.
Yeah, so that would be perhaps what right now in our model is a 3.5%, the blue line, right? Without any
Yes.
spending packages approved and with the full capital, which we know is very, very unlikely to be completed. And so what we're showing you here is what it might be if we
Right.
were to go with a different methodology on the infrastructure replacement.
So if you could go back to the 5% one, the next one.
Yep.
Yes, this one here. So showing the green line anyways, is showing us in a better position anyways, obviously with the total package, right? With the 4 million that you've presented as well as. Okay. And that's not eliminating anything off the spending package.
If I may, yeah, the 5 and the 3.5 are showing the same. Just you can see in the 5 that the numbers are a little bit healthier, right, in terms of the surplus. But
Right.
we would still be able to do all of the spending packages and with maxing the capital and be in a surplus position with the 3.5% as well.
With the, as a follow-up, if I may, so with the 5% tax increase type of thing, have you come up with a dollar figure for the average homeowner, what that's going to look like?
Through the mayor, no, I haven't actually. Today was more about kind of presenting some
Right.
options, and I'm
Right.
sorry, I didn't do that part.
I'm just thinking like 5% is 5%, but to some people, 5% is just a kick in the bucket. The other one, it's the end of the world. So the thing is that it's helpful if we at least took an average. We know that the assessments have gone up and so forth. But it'd be interesting to note with all the extra higher assessments that we have and more properties that we have actually contributing actually to the tax revenue. What it's going to look like for an average would be helpful per household.
Councillor Patterson.
Well, Councillor O'Brien took my suggestion or question. So my question will be for our next budget meeting, based on the scenarios that you've put forward, what a household or property tax of 750,000 property value, because I think that's what our property base value is in Parksville now. I'm not entirely positive, but I think that's the median and if we could see what a 3.5 and a 5% dollar value looks like for the property owner. Does that make sense?
Through the mayor, yeah.
Just so I'm understanding all of this. if we look at this with a 3% tax increase plus 5% going to the reserve fund, we will cover all of the $4 million or thereabouts for the capital expenditures out over the years. It'll be the first time, well, I was here back in 2008, so it's the first time since 2008 that we've shown a positive on the first go around all the way through for 10 years ahead. I'm not sure why we would even be thinking about a 5% increase. We've got the capital covered. We've got all the spending packages are there the way they were supposed to be. And we're only looking at, well, it's a total 3.5% tax increase to the public. I've been talking to a number of mayors around the area, and I haven't heard anything under 8% from any of them at this point in time. I've talked to one this morning, it was 11% that they're talking about. And here we are able to put on the table a 3.5% tax increase and still be out there for the next 10 years and able to do what we can do, which is $4 million a year. So I'm thinking, let's just go with the 3% or 3.5% tax increase and let's get on with it. We're getting all the spending packages that staff have indicated they need to get the job done. I'm so pleasantly surprised. This is the first time we've come up with this number, and by using this system, which is something that we've done. We did it with staff wages last year. We came back and said, look, CAO, you've got X number of dollars to spend. If you want to move somebody from that department over to that department, it really doesn't matter to us as long as you stay within the confines of that number. And so when we put that together along with this, and I think we've come up with a really, really sustainable taxing program here that will go on for years, and we will all look like geniuses in the next 5 to 10 years for having this. So I suggest that we look at the 3% and 0.5% goes to the capital reserve. And the beauty of the 0.5% going to the capital reserve, and we put 0.5% in last year, and if we continue to do that ongoing, we're putting a couple of $100,000 every year into a reserve fund. So if for some reason we end up with this massive big pothole in the middle of the road that's going to cost money, we've got a reserve fund that we can go to without ever touching the $4 million that we're looking at. So we're covering our bases from all the different programs, and then you couple that with what our operations and our engineering department are planning on doing and looking at it in the long run. Yeah, maybe we're going to come back in 2 years and say, they're going to say, that $4 million, it's got to be $5 million because we're finding out that that's what it's going to be. That's okay then. We know we've got a lot of headroom if we've always stayed with this 5%. So I'm thinking that this is the way to go. Councillor Greer.
Could I add one thing, interrupt that I just meant to clarify with respect to the spending packages? The one item that isn't included here is the $700,000 that's allocated for the possible land purchase related to the fire department, which we had suggested would be funded through the land sale reserve, which I think is the appropriate way to use that reserve. So that number is not included in terms of your spending package list. I just wanted to clarify
But
that.
it's accounted for.
Yeah, it would be funded out of the land sale reserve.
Councillor Greer and then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I couldn't agree with you more. I think 3.5% is reasonable. And when these other places are raising their taxes 8 and 10 and 12%, it just shows poor management. I think over the years that I've been here, we've had a great staff that have managed the money well and a pretty good council most of the time to keep the taxes down. So I would certainly support 3.5%. I think that's all that's required at this time, considering the cost of living for everybody else and what the RDN will do and the school board. Thanks.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'm really pleased to see a different direction or a different approach on that. But I do know that regarding the spending packages that we haven't, that are in the budget, but haven't technically been advanced for approval through council. So
Through the mayor, if I could just add, none of those spending packages are reflected in the budget yet. Those charts just show what the impact would be if they were. We would still be looking for specific direction from council tonight with respect to that list of spending packages.
So, thank you, your worship. If I could have council's direction or through the mayor, and that if we were to look at this sheet of paper, I've reviewed quite a bit. I'm not sure if the rest of council has, but we need to let our staff know what direction we're looking at. So if we could have a quick discussion.
Councillor O'Brien?
If I could just have a question, I agree, go along with Councillor Patterson's, but I just have a quick question before we get to that stage.
Please.
The difference in between the 3.5% property tax increase, like that, as you're showing that there, with the 0.5, with the 4 million, with all of the spending packages that we have here, what's the difference in between 5%? What do we get for 5%? Where's the extra? You know what I'm saying?
More money in the bank. is
Yeah,
what
yeah.
it is.
I just not understanding and not comprehending, because the thing is that on the 5% slide, it showed exactly the same. So what is the difference for the extra money? What's that going to go to?
Now, let me just find, so if you look the other way,
That one, yes.
yeah, I mean, it's just more surplus if you have the 5% tax increase than the 3.5. But let me just find my actual amount.
To be clear, this is showing, this is showing us staying in the black for the projection until 2031, but the 3.5% also showed us
Yes.
staying in the black. So I'm trying to figure out the differences.
It's just the level of surplus.
Oh,
So
I see.
in 2031, maybe we've got a $1 million surplus left with 3.5% increase and a $3 million surplus with a 5% increase. It's just relative size of surplus.
It's all about the size of surplus.
Right. They
Okay.
are all in surplus. It's just the relative size of it.
Okay.
If I may just
Yeah.
to add on to that,
Yeah.
because it's a really valid question. When I looked at this last summer and did the numbers, I don't know what this budget's going to do, but when I looked at it for where we were at with $54 million in surplus and reserve funds, we had more money per capita than any other community on Vancouver Island by a significant amount. And that was based on where we are. So if we went to the 5, we would have all we're doing is just putting more money in the bank. And, I'd rather keep it in the pockets of our residents than to put it in the bank,
So
quite frankly.
you're saying we're already there.
We're there.
Right,
We
we're
got
already-
$54 million.
Sure.
Am
Right,
I,
and
what's
that's-
a reserve in surplus? Sorry, Councillor Chan, or Councillor O'Brien. Give me a ballpark.
Yeah, our accumulated surplus at the end of 2021 is about $17 million,
The
just in the
total.
unrestricted.
Okay, and
Yeah.
but total amount in the bank is huge.
It's very healthy. I
Yeah.
wouldn't want to guess the number, but.
Yeah, when I looked at it, it was 54 million at one
That's what I
point in
thought.
time. So, we've got lots to carry us forward. So,
I'm clear. Thank you for that.
okay,
Okay.
thanks, Councillor Chandler. Councillor Patterson? Yes, we will. Yes. Councillor Patterson, you had something else?
No, since Councillor O'Brien asked other further questions and everything, I'd like to, I have a motion or a recommendation that I'd like to put forward tonight with the mayor reviewing and everything as well, if council is
Yeah.
finished with
And
some questions.
I'm prepared to listen to that resolution. However, we do have to go to the public first.
Okay.
All right, in
Thank
order to ask for the input. So I'm going to ask our Mrs. Weeks, if we could summarize first off, any correspondence we've received?
Yes, we just received one piece of correspondence since our last budget meeting. Council received it on March 29th. In summary, it was just regarding lowering development costs, as well as comments on affordable housing, landscaping, and traffic light control.
Okay. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak to the budget process? Please. You have to identify yourself and your address.
In this, and I'm quite grateful actually that things are under control, because you hear so many other things everywhere. It's so bad. Everything's costing more, and this is very good news, in my opinion. I have one question, which is a little odd. It is to do with, I don't know if it's budget, it's to do with where the costs are. And maybe I could just talk to an engineer or something about, I have a question about the water filters.
I'm sorry, the water.
The water filters in the Englishman's River. And so I don't know if it's for an engineer, the cost of cleaning them. This is an ongoing thing. We all have costs, right? Where our money goes. And I've had more than one person mention it to me. So I'm just wondering if anyone knows the cost.
The director of operations is probably the closest you're going to get to an answer, I would think.
Okay. Yep. Is it? Okay. Right, we are. Mhm. Right. Cost of it. So you don't know the cost right now, like, do you clean them every year? How does it work? I see, okay. Okay. Right, I know. We do that. Right? Okay. Right. Okay. Well, this is really good news, because our costs are very high. And so we're managing. Excellent. Okay, thank you.
We have one comment from the CAO, and then we're going to go back. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Mayor and the council. Amit Gore. I work at Stanford, the seniors home next door. So just, I don't know finances much, but just looking at it, looks like status quo, right? Whether you go 3.5, 5%, it's not going to work, right? So either having a max cap or having the spending packages is the way forward. I'm just thinking maybe having spending packages may be the best way managing budgets in the future. But also just to add one thing, I'm sorry if it's irrelevant,
No,
but
that's fine.
if we go ahead with our aquatic center or the rec center, this will all be kind of out of whack, right? All this spending and will be affected quite a bit, I'm guessing, or would that be coming from the reserve fund that you said is $50 million?
Don't know the answer to your question yet at this point in time. It obviously will affect the tax base. There's no doubt about that. How it's going to cost, how much it's going to cost, who's going to pay for it, whether it's the federal government, provincial government, the municipal governments, all of those have to be taken into consideration if in fact the public decides. But having said that, when it's time and all the information is put together for a swimming pool and whatever else we decide that is put forward, it is the residents that will vote on this, not council. It'll go directly to the residents for approval. So you will have a chance at that point in time to accept or reject the whole proposal. And you will know what the effect will be on your taxes at that point in time. But no, none of this, the swimming pool has not been taken into any consideration for this plan. Okay. And we have CAO now wants to speak.
Thank you. If I may, Your Worship, I just wanted to take this opportunity in response to Ms. Martin's question. We are hoping now that COVID is hopefully behind us to have the opportunity for tours of our treatment plant. And we just did that with some of our board members and RDN staff the other day. And myself, I was lucky to be able to attend and I found it extremely informative. Our staff shared tons of information that just really helped me understand kind of all the nuances. So keep your eyes open, and on our website, as soon as we're able, we will be looking to do tours for groups and for schools and for interested folks. That was always the intent and how the plant was kind of set up. And we're really excited to welcome people in and show them exactly what's going on in there. So hopefully we can get to that very soon.
Thank you. Now, back to Councillor Patterson. She started off and then we left her sitting there.
Not at all. I had a couple sidebars with our CAO and we both said, oh yeah, we want to say that in regards to the water filtration, because it truly is amazing. And I honestly believe, as everyone around this table and previous councils know, that I'm such a huge supporter of youth and in our community. And I think that being able to view a facility like we have gives them some ideas of the future and what they could do and everything like that. But that's a sidebar or type thing. But at this time, I'd like to put forward a recommendation. And as it goes, it is that staff be directed to prepare the 5-year financial plan and tax rate bylaws, maintaining the 3% increase in property taxes plus a 0.5% increase for contribution to the capital reserve fund, and including the spending packages. So that was what I was talking about earlier, outlining in attachment number 1 dated March 30th, 2022, and was presented to council. And 2, that staff be directed to prepare the 5-year water fund financial plan bylaw and water utility rates bylaw with a 3% increase and including the water-related spending packages outlined in attachment 1 dated March 30th, 2022, and was presented to council earlier. And 3, that staff be directed to prepare the 5-year sewer fund financial plan bylaw and sewer utility rates bylaw with a 3% increase and including the sewer related spending packages outlined in attachment 1, number 1, also dated March 30th, 2022, and presented to council by our Director of Finance. If I could have.
Are you making, that's in 3 different parts. Are you going to make them all at
Yes.
one time?
I'd
It's fine, you
I'd
can.
like to, unless any other.
Yeah, that's fine.
Wants them
You-
separated, but I'm looking for a seconder.
Councillor Chandler had his hand up first, folks, sorry. All right, discussion. It was yours to begin with. Councillor Patterson, please.
Thank you so much, Your Worship. I'm honestly so really pleased with the budget that's been prepared and some of the new outlook prospects and everything that we're looking at. This council has done so much. And I can say that because like the mayor and Councillor Greer have sat at this table and everything in the past. And it's very forward thinking. It's very needed. And I'm really optimistic. You know, when I first started this journey, I always said that to my children, it was that the decisions that I made, I always have to remember that they are for you, for the future, because I'll always be held responsible by my children. And I couldn't be more proud of sitting at this table and some of the decisions and everything that have been made and the budget that's been put forward this term. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak? Counselor O'Brien?
Thank you, Your Worship. I would echo that as well, that I am so impressed with the performance of the staff that put this package together, and especially the latest forward-thinking motion or suggestion, recommendation anyways, for the 4 million is just amazing. And it's thinking outside the box, and it's taking us into very healthy territory where we're taking care of future taxpayers as well. And also commendation to the staff as well, who we've had major changes in staff during the process, just in our term. And obviously we had a pretty good succession plan in play, because I see 3 new faces here that were not sitting. Jen, of course, was here prior, but now in a management position and so forth. And I'm so impressed with what you brought to the table. And I'm so impressed with our CAO that she found you. Because you've taken us to a new level, and you've made us just very proud of the work. And this council has done an enormous amount of work and projects that we've laid out for the staff, and they've endured us. I don't know how, but they've accomplished so much because of that. And here we are coming up with a 3.5% increase, which is so reasonable. I believe it really is reasonable. And so thank you so much for that. I'm beyond words. I just want to touch base quickly on the comment from Sylvia Martin anyways, regarding the ERWS. Belinda, Director of Ops, anyways, give you an overview of the noodles in the filtration and treatment process. What she didn't allude to the fact is that there was a certain process and a certain project that was designed and so forth to handle the filtration and so forth. And it was, on paper, it looked really good. But the thing is that what the staff has done since that time, they've modified that. It hasn't been tweaks. It's been major changes to make it more effective, to make it more resilient. And they have done this, and this is what Belinda was referring to as the spending packages approved by the different boards, came to us with a proposal for things like the geo bag and so forth, that saved our taxpayers a lot of money in extra costs and so forth that was not foreseen, but they came up with a suggestion to alleviate these extra costs. That's reflected in here. And that is because of them doing the extra work and researching to get those costs down, but also to make the plant work more efficiently. And so those noodles, they're going to last longer, and they work amazing at what they have to do, and under very tough conditions. They've worked out the recipe, the formula to clean them properly, and so that they will last a long time. So it's all part of the process, and I can speak to that because that's just happening in this one department. This staff are taking it from all the different departments, wherever it is already in the city, and they are taking that same mindset and saying, how can we do better with what we have? And they come through so much. Here it is. The proof is in the financial statement, folks. So Sylvia, thank you for your question, because it's truly amazing to have a look at that plant, and you'll love it when you do. So thanks again. I'm feeling very good right now. Thank you.
Counselor Wilson?
Thank you, Worship. Well, I just have to say, thanks. They've done a wonderful job. And as I said this to our CAO last week, I'm really impressed, really, really impressed. So everybody else around the table has said enough. I just want to say thank you. Good job.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. I think we've got to bring up one point. I don't want to be raining on any parades here, but there is one small technicality that we've got to look at and make a decision at here, because in the recommendation and the resolution that Councillor Patterson suggested, I believe it was a 3% for water and a 3% for tax, or for sewer, if I'm not mistaken. Yet on the diagrams, it was 5% in total, 3 and 2. Is that not correct? Yeah, but so we've increased by 1% on the water side of it. Is that correct?
If I may, yeah, I think that was the resolution, which I would support. I know that with the ERWS, it's early in its operational and we're getting to know all of these things that need to be modified. So I think it's prudent to go forward with the 3%. I think that as we're trying to establish service levels and costs in that function, it just leaves us in a better position without a really significant impact to taxpayers. And certainly having 3% in each of them, just makes it easier to talk about, I guess.
Exactly. And the thing that I think we should be bringing up is that we don't know what we don't know with the RDN, with the French Creek treatment plant coming in there. There's a huge sum of money that's going to be requisitioned from the city of Parksville at some point in time. So even 1% is a help for, as we've proven all along, putting money aside for the rainy day isn't a bad thing in this community. So I'm all in favor of the 3 and 3 and 3, triple 3 on this for it. So I will support that wholeheartedly.
If I could just add one comment on that is, I had mentioned in one of our previous meetings, the idea of bringing forward at the end of a year when we look at what the surplus ended up actually being, and council making choices about making additional contributions to reserves and things like that. So if the 3% turns out to be more than what was needed in the year, council could turn around and decide to just put that excess into the capital fund for those things that may be coming in the next 10 to 20 years. And I think, again, that's just a prudent kind of reserves policy that we could start to visit each year after our financial year is done.
Okay, Councillor Chandler, and we're going to wrap it up.
Thank you, through the mayor. Just again, I just wanted to thank staff and council too for all the work we've all done. I'd like to speak for Councillor Fraz as well. He asked me to thank everybody for the work done. He's remote tonight and unable to have attended, but he wanted me to pass that on to you all as well, that he appreciates all this great work that's been done throughout this time. So, and outside of that, it's a great process. Considering where we started, in 2018, we saw our first budget information and so on. It's really come a long way, and it's quite amazing. So thank you again for all the hard work.
Next year's budget program, you think about how much easier it's going to be. You come to capital and you say, okay, $4 million there next, and that's really what it's going to amount to with this process. So life for the next budget is going to be a much simpler process. You won't have to go through all the nitty-gritty stuff that we've heard. So it's just going to be spending packages again is all that we're going to be addressing. So if everybody's had a say, then what I would like to do is call the question. All those in favor of the resolution? Unanimous. Thank you very much. And to staff, everybody's told you how wonderful we think you are. It's not even close to being truthful. It is way past all of that. So great job. Great job to the operations and the engineering department for coming up with this concept for the capital expenditures. It's something that we've been talking about for, well, in my case, probably 12 years now. And so you've come a long ways, and we can do nothing but thank you all for your contribution. So make sure I don't forget anything. It's got a magic word here. It says adjournment. I need a motion to adjourn. Councillor Greer, second by Councillor Wilson. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you very, very much. Great meeting.